Hello and welcome to Books and Us. I'm Ranjit Monga. Listeners, we have reached the end of season 2. This is the final episode or the 12th episode. If you would like to read about all the podcast interviews, you can visit the website www.globalbihari.com and search for the column Literary Speaking. You can also follow us on Instagram, on Substack, or follow our community on Facebook.
If you go to the Jantar Mantar today, you will see the first and the largest instrument is something that's called the Samrat Yantra, which is a sundial. All the yantras, all the instruments in the observatory have two main functions. The functions are to plot solar time and to measure the positions of celestial objects. So basically, it's to measure time and space. Such large instruments of astronomy have not been made anywhere in the world.
So, welcome to episode 12 of season 2 of Books and Us. And today we have also completed 25 episodes of this podcast, which we started 2.5 years ago. It has been a bittersweet journey. Mostly it's been good. So, we have saved something truly special for the finale of this season. We are joined once again by author and conservation architect Anisha Shekhar Mukherji, whose earlier appearances explored the Red Fort of Shahjahanabad in 2 episodes. Both episodes were two of our most heard discussions. They were rich with insight and historical depth, and people responded quite well. Today, we will continue that journey with another of her remarkable works on another set of monuments. So, Anisha, welcome back. It's wonderful to have you here.
Thank you so much, Ranjit. It's very good to be back and to be able to discuss my books and another one of my favorite monuments.
So, do you have any feedback to give on the 2 episodes on the Red Fort?
Yes, I got very positive feedback, both from professionals working in the field of education, history, architecture, as well as people who are unconnected professionally with these disciplines, but who obviously have an interest in, in such an iconic monument like the Red Fort. And also personally, for me, I found the conversation and also your questions that led up to the conversation very useful because for a set of buildings such as the Red Fort, which is a complex piece of construction and has lived through 3 centuries and more, and has transformed so much. There are so many aspects to it. Even the book dealt with multiple aspects, and I found the process of drawing out certain key, let's say, interests that you had, which you identified through your questions, I found them very useful myself as well in kind of revisiting the fort. And in fact, I think I'm impelled to write some standalone essays based on your
Uh-huh.
questions. So I think it was a very, very useful and a very enjoyable process and a discussion.
Okay, I would like to read those essays as well. Because I also got a lot of feedback from my friends, and as I told you, I used to be a history student. I shared it with my, college classmates. Many of them are now history professors and researchers. So they were also complimenting you on quite a lot about your detailed and in-depth analysis of so many things, which look so normal on the face of it, but there's something really deep. They have really deep meanings.
Thank you. I'm so happy to hear that because it's very important to know what listeners and readers think. Uh, that's the only way to to move forward, and so it's also reassuring to know that some of what I tried to communicate did get through. Thank you.
So, today in this episode, we turn our attention to a monument, or rather, a collection of monuments, which are fascinating because of their scientific and symbolic importance. The book is Jantar Mantar, Maharaja Sawai Jai Singh's Observatory in Delhi, authored by Anisha. The Jantar Mantar was built in the early 18th century on the outskirts of Shahjahanabad by Sawai Jai Singh, the ruler of Amber. Sawai Jai Singh was also a key ally of the Mughal Empire. The observatory was designed for astronomical calculations and timekeeping. Yet, for centuries, its deeper purpose and architectural significance were not known until now. Anisha's book offers a meticulously researched and visually rich exploration of Jantar Mantar, revealing its layered meanings and historical context. As an architect specializing in conservation, Anisha brings a unique lens to this landmark, one that bridges science, symbolism, and urban memory. And of course, our great astronomical traditions. So, Anisha, while Jantar Mantar is widely recognized today, often as a backdrop for protests in central Delhi, and as I also grew up in Delhi and I have been seeing this set of monuments since my childhood, but I never really went beyond knowing that it was an observatory built by a ruler from Jaipur. So, what was the original function and design of this, and what all is contained in your book?
So, the book is actually an outcome of a very long research process, which was initiated by an invitation from Priya Paul, who's a chairperson of the APJ Park Hotels, APJ Surendra Park Hotels, where she asked me to look at the observatory complex site and to prepare a plan for the beautification and improvement of the environs of the complex. And so when she asked me to do that, I said that while that was a wonderful idea, it could not be done without understanding what the site's original form, function, and requirements were, because everything had to be generated from that. And so I proposed that we do an in-depth kind of an historical as well as a functional kind of research exercise, and through that we arrive at what we should be doing to the observatory complex, or what we should be proposing should be done to the observatory complex. And as a result of that, there was, I did field studies and archival research, and that resulted in a feasibility report, which then formed the basis for a for an agreement with the ASI and later with the National Cultural Fund to conserve the yantras. And so I was the conservation consultant to the Jantar Mantar project, and that went on for a very long time, during the course of which there was a very wide range of sources that I accessed, from the ASI photo archive to the ASI archival documents to the National Museum to the Jaipur Jantar Mantar, which is one of the, it's one of the few functioning Jantar Mantars, to a whole host of other things, to field studies, measure drawings, etc. And then you see the methodology of the project and the objective of the project was that we, right from the initial research that I did for the feasibility report, I realized that everything in the observatory complex, the forms, the details, the location, all of it was linked to the function that they had of being instruments of astronomy. And we therefore wanted that that kind of compelling motive for establishing the observatory to be widely known, accepted, appreciated. And the methodology throughout the conservation exercise was to disseminate whatever we had learned about the observatory through our research and studies, and also to change the mindset that was already there. You mentioned that you knew that this was an observatory, but not much beyond that. And that really was that was current throughout most of the population of Delhi, as well as people who came from elsewhere, as well as the official custodians. The ASI also regarded it essentially as a group of archaeological monuments. So, as an outcome of that, all the research that was done, I wanted that this should go out into the public domain, and therefore the book contains all of that. It obviously in a form that's easy to understand, and is not in the form of an official report or a conservation plan, but it contains all that I've spoken about, the field studies that we did, the archival research that I embarked on, the kind of information that I access from various repositories, the meetings that we had with various people from the ASI, with people from the Jaipur Jantar Mantar, with the Nehru Planetarium. So all that is really in the book.
Mhm. Yeah, and also I saw that I mean the book is neatly laid out with the Indian tradition or Vedic traditions of astronomy and how the knowledge went to the West, and then it came back to us later on, and how these set of monuments were like a culmination of all that knowledge. Can you tell me something about that?
Yes, so I'll just speak a little bit about the way the book is formulated.
Mm,
So essentially, the focus is on the Delhi Jantar Mantar, which
mm,
is the oldest of all the Jantar Mantars, and therefore historically and culturally the most important. And the book is structured so that there is a bit of introduction and a context
mm,
to the Delhi Jantar Mantar, where it was established, why, when, all of that.
mm,
And then there are also these walks that are devised around each of the yantras or the
mm,
instruments. There are six of them, and there are four different kinds of instruments over there that are possible to access today. And then the last three sections deal with the tradition of Indian astronomy,
mm,
with Maharaja Sawai Singh himself as a person and as a patron of this, and the way ahead in terms of what the Jantar Mantar project proposes to do.
mm,
Now, as far as your question is concerned about the tradition of Indian astronomy and how the Jantar Mantar looks back or incorporates it, as well as other knowledge systems.
mm,
So it's very interesting. If you go to the Jantar Mantar today, you will see the first and the largest instrument is something that's called the Samrat Yantra, which is
mm,
a sundial.
mm,
So again, to step back a little, all the yantras, all the instruments in the observatory have two main functions.
mm,
The functions are to plot solar time and to measure the positions of celestial objects. So basically, it's to measure time and space.
mm.
And
So
these all,
yantras are each of these buildings is actually a prototype of a yantra, which used to be the tiny ones which earlier the kings and all used to use, right?
no, each of these buildings are not a prototype of a yantra. A few are, I mean, actually, the buildings are yantras. The
Buildings are
buildings
yantras,
are,
yeah.
yeah, they are
Mm,
instruments of astronomy, and
mm,
that is both their strength as well as the challenge in appreciating and conserving them, because they're far more complex, therefore, than any other kind
mm,
of building that we may have encountered.
mm,
And also, they're far more complex than any other kind of instrument of astronomy that we may have encountered because of the fact that they're also buildings.
mm,
So, I like to say this, that it's not a fort, it's not a tower, it's not a
mm,
memorial, it's not a temple. So they kind of defy descriptions as buildings.
mm,
And they're also very unique because you such large instruments of astronomy have not been made anywhere in the world.
mm,
So, and many of these instruments that we see today, the yantras, are actually, they were made for the first time at the
mm,
Delhi Jantar Mantar. So that's why it's such a unique place.
mm,
Some of the instruments, some of the yantras, like the Shasthamsa yantra,
mm,
which unfortunately cannot be accessed anymore. In fact, for the past 100 years, it's not been accessed because
mm,
of some conservation exercise that happened in the early 20th century, where
mm,
apparently there was water seepage and some other problems, and it was sealed up.
mm,
So subsequently, it hasn't been entered, but that is what is called a sextant. It's a 60-degree instrument, Shasthamsa, Shast and
mm,
Amsa, so 60 degrees, which is based on an older sextant that
mm,
was there in an observatory in Samarkand. And
mm,
Jai Singh mentions this. He clearly acknowledges that this is based on that instrument. However, the other instruments, some of the other instruments like the Samrat Yantra, like the Jai Prakash Yantra, like the Ram Yantra, are actually, we can call them inventions of Jai
mm.
Singh and his advisors. So there is no precedent for them.
Okay.
And there are some other instruments which don't exist anymore at
Mm,
the Delhi Observatory for whatever reason. We don't find evidence of them, any physical evidence of them, though
Okay.
there are descriptions of them at some point. So the Dakshinottara Bhitti instrument, which is the first instrument to be built here, no longer exists here.
Okay.
Which there is, there is a tradition of such instruments, or at least the principles of such instruments earlier
Mm,
on as well.
mm,
But these instruments were made for the first time. Many of these instruments were made for the first time here, and Savai Jaising explicitly says this also in
mm,
his in the records that we have, and some of the later researchers, including some of the British researchers who were otherwise very biased against
mhm,
these instruments being of any practical value, they also say that these instruments appear to be innovations of Jai Singh
mm,
and his advisors. So some of them were made for the very first time ever,
mm,
and the reason that they were made as such large, immovable pieces of architecture was that initially, as you did ask,
mm,
he did he did get his advisors and helpers and collaborators to make smaller instruments in metal.
mhm,
But there were some problems in those. One was
mm,
a problem of scale, because
mm,
when you have a small instrument, you obviously cannot calibrate it to
mm,
the degree that you could calibrate a larger instrument. So you can't get very fine subdivisions, in the sense you can't, your scales that you are working with
mm,
are not those that can enable very accurate measurements. And the other thing is also that he found that instruments of metal, uh, and instruments that had movable parts, they tended to wear out with time, they tended to get deformed. And so, as an outcome of all of that, the idea of making immovable instruments,
mhm.
instruments in masonry, not in metal, and with parts that are fixed, that was generated through the initial experiments that were done with movable instruments in metal, which were of a smaller scale.
So you have described in detail the five yantras and how they were used to measure time and other aspects of astronomy. So let's start with the Samrat yantra. For example, can you take us through the its form and function and what we know of it through architecture?
Yes, sure. So, first, let me ask you a counter question.
Yeah,
So, when you visited the Jantar Mantar,
yeah, many
and
times.
many times, so what is the first sight that you recollect of entering the observatory, and of what do you recollect as your first impression?
I when I read through all your yantras, I recollected that huge one with those, that huge wall with
Mm.
arches on it,
Yes.
and
Yeah.
the one in which there are these cylindrical buildings with columns, columns in between.
The Ram
Because
Yantra. Yeah.
yeah, because I remember that some films some Bollywood films in the 80s were also filmed there,
Oh, that's
and
very interesting. You must tell me which ones.
I think it was
If you remember.
this
Yeah.
movie Saath Saath. I remember
Oh, I see.
this movie Saath Saath, and there was
Mm.
some song which was uh,
Mm.
shot there. So it was shown frequently in some movies. So
Right.
some of these buildings I remembered, and of course the one which was the emblem of the 82 Asian Games,
The Mishra Yantra.
the Mishra Yantra. Yeah, the
Yes.
mini Yantra. It's a mini Yantra, right?
Yeah, it's the smallest of all of them.
Yeah.
So, yes, so the Samrat Yantra is the largest.
Mm,
And in fact, some people ascribe the name Samrat to the fact that, it's so imposing and it's so grand.
mm,
And this is today, if you enter the Jantar Mantar, this is it's directly in access with the gate. So what
mm,
you see this kind of very high, slim wall rising up, towering up, with
mm,
two curved sections coming out from both sides, like
mm,
almost like horns on either side of this
mm,
vertical
mm,
wall. And this is a Samrat Yantra. But actually, what is what most people don't realize is that we enter the observatory from what was its back.
mm,
So, when originally you wouldn't actually have seen the Samrat like this, and
mm,
the first sight would have been far more dramatic, because you would have, as I said, this is the back of the Samrat. So, the front of the Samrat actually reveals its entire
mm.
kind of span and scale.
Yeah.
If I was to explain again, as the Jantar Mantars are very dramatic in
Mm.
form. So you mentioned
Yeah.
that a lot of Bollywood films, or at least some Bollywood films you recollect,
Mm.
were shot there. When I was researching on the Jantar Mantar and references to it, I found that there was a Vogue shoot at the Jantar
Mhm.
Mantar at
Mm.
one point, and it's been in architectural, in books on architecture
Mm.
history and on books on architecture in general, they've been celebrated for their forms. So they've been, termed this
Mm.
cubist fantasia and things like that.
Mhm. Mhm.
Um,
Magical
Now,
buildings.
yes, because they don't look like
Yeah.
buildings. They
Anything
don't.
you ever seen before. Yeah.
Yes, and even even in this day and age when people are trying to make buildings as weird as possible, even then they
Mm.
kind of hold their own. So what is
Mm.
important is to understand that these fantastic forms of the Jantar Mantar, which everybody responds to and remembers, are not just for the heck of it. They actually emanate from their function,
Mm.
and the function dictates or directs what these forms are. So if let's go back to the Samrat Yantra,
Mhm.
and if you were to go around it, so today if you were to enter the observatory and you go straight, you see this very high wall, and then you circle it and you actually come to the front of the Samrat.
Mm.
So the Samrat Yantra, if I was to describe it very simply, is like a right angled triangle
Mm.
with in positioned in a semicircle, very simply, right? So it's
Mm.
it's like a huge right angle triangle which is sitting in the center of a semicircle. So basically then there are these two quarter circles that come out from both sides of it, which are described as the horns.
Mm.
And this is oriented, the the triangular part of it, which is called the gnomon, is oriented exactly north south. So it's like a
Mm.
huge pointer.
Mm.
If it's like a huge pointer to the north south directions. If you were to go to the observatory and you stand right in front of it, you'll be essentially oriented north south. And the dials, the semicircular portions. So the left dial is to the west and the right dial is to the east. So they're
Mm.
oriented exactly east west.
Mm.
And this is the primary instrument, I would say, of the Delhi Jantar Mantar, and it is probably the oldest surviving instrument in all the Jantar Mantars.
Mhm.
Because, as I mentioned, initially there was another yantra. The first yantra at the Delhi Jantar Mantar, as we learn through records, was called the Dakshinottara Bhitti Yantra, which was used to measure the latitude of the place.
Mm.
And that is important in constructing the Samrat Yantra because the hypotenuse of this triangle, which
Mm.
forms the central part of the Samrat Yantra,
Mm.
is angled at the latitude of Delhi. So to
Mhm.
know what the latitude is, they first needed another instrument, which
Mm.
was the Dakshinottara Bhitti, which unfortunately does not exist anymore.
Mm.
So therefore, the Samrat, as I surmise, is the oldest yantra in all the observatories that Jantar Mantar established. So it's very, very important.
Mm.
Functionally, the reasons for this huge triangle, which is,
Mm.
okay.
Mm.
Do you uh, can you guess how high this is? I mean, not necessarily in feet or meters, but just as a perception of,
No,
you
no,
know.
I know it. I know it from your book. It is 3 stories high.
No, it's not. It's 7 stories high.
7 stories.
It's
Oh.
7 stories high. 3 stories high would be the Ram yantras, etc.
Okay, okay, okay.
This is almost 7 stories high.
Mm.
So it's
Mm.
very, very, it's very tall. And
With the
if
staircase in the middle,
yes,
right?
the staircase in the center, which one can't climb up anymore, is
Mm.
like a straight flight up.
Mm.
So I also, when I was doing the research, I also marveled at the fact that astronomers at that time needed to be physically very agile. They needed to climb up and
Mm.
down this many times a day. So it's very, very large. I think the reason perhaps we don't sense the fact that it's so large is that it's partly built in the ground, in the sense it's like it's dug into the ground. It starts
Mm.
below the ground level, and there's a constructional reason for that as well.
Mm.
So the Samrat Yantra was essentially to measure solar time. So it's like a giant clock. We can
Mm.
call it a giant solar clock. And the triangular portion is the part which whose shadow falls on the semicircular dials, and through the shadow you read the time. And the angle of the triangular portion, as well as the curve of the dials, is made in a way that the shadow moves equal intervals in equal it moves through equal spaces in equal intervals of time, so it's very easy therefore to use. So it was a very complex instrument to construct, but originally its usage was very simple because of the fact that it was made in this way, which is called a equatorial or an equinoctial dial. So it moved, the sun's shadow moves through equal distances in equal intervals of time, as opposed to if you had a flat, instead of a circular dial, if you just had a flat surface on which the shadow would fall, the shadow will move unequally. It will move
Mm-hmm.
unequal distances in equal intervals of time. Whereas here, because the dials, they are made in the plane of the equator, so
Mm-hmm.
therefore the shadow moves through equal intervals of space in equal intervals of time, and that makes the task of reading the shadow measurements very simple. You can just you can just measure, or of course in Jessing's time it was calibrated. You had to just read off the calibrations. Today the calibrations don't exist, and in fact part of the dials also don't exist. They were covered over in a conservation exercise, so you only have half of the dials on both sides left.
Okay. So the shadow of the wall, which is in a shape of a triangle, falls on. So when the sun rises, the shadow
Yes.
falls on the western one. And when it,
Yes.
after noon, post noon, when it starts setting, it falls on the eastern side of the dial.
Yes, when the sun rises, the triangular wall, which is called the gnomon,
Mm,
its shadow falls, as you said, on the west,
mm,
which is the side towards Parliament Street.
mm,
And then, as the sun keeps going higher and higher, the shadow keeps moving down the dial
mm.
till it disappears. At 12
Oh,
noon, when the sun is right on top, absolutely on top of
yeah.
the dial, then for a few seconds it won't be there, and then it'll move back again
Mm.
up to towards the upper end of the eastern
Eastern.
dial till sunset, when it disappears. So it's actually fascinating if you were to spend an afternoon there. Though of course, as I mentioned, half of the dials have been covered over, so you can only
Mm,
see the sun's movement from about 6 o'clock to about 9 o'clock in the morning, and then about from 3 o'clock in the afternoon to 6 o'clock in the evening. But it's quite
mm.
fascinating to see it move.
Yeah,
And
and it would be to perceive how time keeps moving. It doesn't stop because you would
yes,
see the shadow constantly moving, and that each of this movement equals a couple of seconds, isn't it?
yes, and you see, otherwise, time is of course an abstract notion, and
Yeah.
we kind of we kind of measure time through cyclical movements, whether it's
Mm.
the movement of the moon, the movement of the sun, whatever it is. But essentially, you could say that in many ways, time is an abstract construct. So
Hmm.
to see it visually is
Yes, that's
is
what.
an incredible experience, and
Mm.
initially the calibrations on the instruments on the Samrat yantra was so fine that you could read time to an accuracy of 2 seconds,
Wow.
and comparable, let's say, instruments at that time, for instance, in Europe, would, in terms of, let's say, the pendulum clock, etc., would only be able to read to, let's say, 10 seconds. I mean, later on, then in 1721, they did develop a pendulum clock which was accurate to 1 second per day. But,
Mm.
that's the same. So we could say that it's comparable to that. It's
Mm.
achieving results comparable to those kinds of instruments
Mhm.
with a completely different kind of technology. So it was very, very remarkable. And it talks about, it reveals to us not just their skills in imagining and computing
Mm.
uh, time, but also their skills in constructing such accurate instruments
Yeah,
at that
absolutely.
scale.
Absolutely.
So it's both. It's a testimony to both.
Mm. And at night, I believe that instead of the sun, you could identify some celestial body, maybe a planet, and then you could sit near the dial and align it with the wall, and then you could make your observations. Is that how it worked?
So at night, what happens is that you can't do shadow observations,
Yeah.
obviously. So
Mm,
you have to have a different system, and
mm,
the system that was devised was that you look at a celestial body who's where you know what time it transits the meridian through
mm,
existing tables or calculations, and then you observe it by, as you mentioned, sitting at on the dial and
mm.
aligning that celestial body with the edge of the triangle, with the edge of the gnomon. And the
Uh-huh.
place that you're sitting at,
Mm,
you read off what is the calibration there,
mm,
and then based on that gives you the hour angle, and then based on the what you know as the meridian transit time, which is the time that that particular celestial body will transit the meridian, or
mm,
the topmost point, then you can work back, you can calculate based on that. So you need a reference, basically. For
mm,
these kinds of measurements, you need a reference. During the daytime, your reference is the sun and its shadows, and during the nighttime, your reference is a celestial body about whom you already have some information,
mm,
which you can then use to calculate, to work back the time of observation.
mm.
So it's in detail. It's a little difficult to explain,
Yes, I know.
in words. But
Without
the book, of
visuals.
course, has yeah, it has
Yeah.
diagrams, and it
Mm,
it uh, it it does try to explain this as simply as
mm.
possible.
And how does it reflect the geometry of the universe?
Well, if you look at all the instruments, you'll see that most of them are like pure geometrical shapes.
Uh-huh.
And
Mm,
again, if I go back, for instance, to the Samrat Yantra, as I mentioned, its shape and its angle is
mm,
linked to where it is. So, for instance, I mentioned that uh, the hypotenuse of this
mm,
triangle,
mm.
it makes the same angle with the ground as the latitude of Delhi.
Uh-huh.
What that means is that, and now remember that the Samrat Yantra is one instrument that is made in all five of the observatories established
Mm,
by Jai Singh.
mm,
These observatories are established in different locations, in different cities,
mm,
in different parts of India. So it's not as if these triangles are the same. The
mhm,
angle varies according to where the Samrat
mm,
is constructed. So it is basically, at Banaras, it'll be the latitude of Banaras.
mm,
At Jaipur, it'll be the latitude of Jaipur. So there's one is that there's this direct reflection of
mm,
the geometry, of the Earth,
mm,
based on where it's located.
mm,
And then the dials, as I mentioned, are they are in the plane of the equator. They are right angles to to the base of the
mm,
to the plane of the triangle, and therefore, if so, there's a drawing that I've made in the I had another collaborator with me, Vikrant Sood, who worked with me right at the very beginning. So he's made this very nice sketch where you can see the Samrat sitting. It's obviously a scale drawing, but
mm,
and it's enlarged, but the Samrat sitting on the Earth.
mm,
And therefore, you can see that the hypotenuse is parallel to
mm,
the latitude at that point. You can see how the quadrants, the plane of the quadrants is parallel to the equator. And it points to the pole star.
mm,
So it reflects both the larger geometry of the skies and the stars that we look
mm,
at and we refer to, and the specific geometry the of the Earth where we are located. Other instruments also, for instance, we haven't spoken about the Jai Prakash yantra, which is I think visually it's a
mm.
spectacular yantra, and it's probably the most mysterious of all the yantras, because
Okay.
I'm speaking about this yantra, which is like a bowl scooped inside the earth,
Mm,
and it's got these sections like wedges which are cut out, and it looks very, very abstract,
mm.
but essentially it's like a reflection of the sky. So it's like
Okay,
the
so
bowl.
inverted sky, like an
Yes, it's
inverted
like the
sky.
inverted sky,
Mm,
and within that there are various calibrations which reflect various ways of making sense of the sky and objects in it. So it's like, if I was to give directions to somebody about how they are to reach me, reach my house, for instance, or reach somewhere where I'm standing, I'll point to landmarks, or I mean, these days, of course, everybody just uses Google Maps. But if I have to tell them, then I'll tell them, okay, this is basically you need reference points, right, to reach anywhere. So similarly, the bowl of the sky that we are inverting and representing in the Jai Prakash Yantra, we need references for us to actually plot positions of objects in the sky that we want information about. Because also
Yeah.
remember that the purpose of this this is observational astronomy. The idea is to observe both planets, stars, and determine where they are located in the heavens, and also determine the time that we are taking those locations from. So therefore there are various ways of, in the various reference systems, there's something which is called the altitude azimuth system, which is local coordinates. So basically it's related to the horizon, and your location in terms reference to the longitude. And there are also something called universal coordinates that are not linked to where you are on the earth. So all these different kinds of ways of figuring out where you are and what time you are, etc., all of these are marked on this inverted bowl of the Jai Prakash. But marking is not enough. I mentioned the fact that they're building. So the challenge is that how do you how do you come close to this marking? How do you read them? How do you access them? So you have to have systems of entering them. So again, you have these sections in these bowls that are kind of scooped away or taken away to enable the observers or the users to step down, to walk in, and to align their eyes with what they're observing. So that's why you have it's like the sky which is inverted with things happening to it, with markings on it which enable you to see what are the to figure out what are the different objects in the sky, where they are, what time you are seeing them, so that finally you can record all this. And all these recordings can then be used to update your set of tables of astronomy for a very practical reason, which is that then you need to also project or predict when cyclical occurrences will happen again, whether it's a lunar eclipse or whether it is simply the estimated sunrise or sunset, or uh, you know the 15th day or the 13th day or whatever it is. So you need to know all that. To know all that, to predict all that, you first need accurate measurements. And to get accurate measurements, you need very, very accurate and appropriate instruments, which is what all these yantras in the observatory are. And if I was to finally talk about the building that you said you found most arresting, which is the Ram Yantra, which are these cylindrical buildings which are open to the sky with the central column. It's visually and spatially a very, very dramatic and overwhelming place to enter, because
Yeah.
you enter something that's enclosed, and then you come inside it and you see it's open to the sky. And it's circular, so it kind of reflects the, in a sense, both symbolically as well as otherwise, the earth and the heavens and all of that. And then from this central pillar you have these radials that emanate. So the entire interior is made up of segments of circle, arches, arcs. And it's a very, very moving experience to be in there, because so you both feel that you're part of a larger geometry. And of course, apart from just that kind of emotional experience that you have,
Yeah, and
there's a
also,
very practical reason for all of them.
just also I wanted to include that there are. I read in your book that these two buildings. There are these two cylinders, and
Yes.
the columns around in the circle and the radials on the floor, they
Yeah.
correspond exactly with each other. So if you would put the buildings together, they would all merge into each other. Isn't that so?
Yes, so actually they're like complementary buildings. So both
Complementary
the
buildings.
Jayaprakash and the Ramyantra, they're like complementary buildings in the sense the sections that are solid in one are the
Mm.
voids in the other.
Ah.
Right, and the reason for that is what I mentioned, that to enable you to access them and to be able to go at close quarters, put your eye to the and align your eye with the celestial body, with the rim of either the bowl or the cylinder.
Mm.
How do you do that if it's a complete solid? So you need areas that you can enter, which is why
Mm.
for instance in the Ram Yantra there is a central pillar which
Mm.
has markings, which basically breaks up, the entire 360 degrees are marked on that central column. And then
Mm.
emanating from that, you have these arcs,
Mm.
which are like segments, which join this to the wall that is enclosing
Mm.
this entire
Mm. Mm.
space. And so each segment, now, if it was a continuous, let's say, round floor,
Mm.
you would not be able you not be able to actually get down and
Mm.
see it. So here, because there are these wedges, so uh, there is a 6 degree arc, 6 degree wedge, and
Mm.
then there is a gap of 6 degrees. So you can actually stand in that gap and you can align your eye, you can read off a measurement.
Mm.
And similarly, the same thing happens with the other building, because if they were solid you would not be able to access them. If
Mm.
they were solid they could only work if they were tiny, right? So then you can kind of hold them up. But here, since we have to enter them, you need
Mm.
space to enter them. So they're very, so that's also something that's very unusual and unique about both these sets of buildings, the
Mm.
Jayaprakash and the Ramyantras, the fact that they are complementary buildings. And a lot of the earlier writers, some of the earlier writers like William Hunter, who wrote about these observatories in the transactions of the Astronomy Society,
Mm.
he thought they were identical. He couldn't figure
Mm.
out
He couldn't
what they
figure
were
out.
meant for. Yeah,
Yes.
so but they're not identical; they're complementary,
Mm.
which is again, I mean, it's a great feat of architecture. Apart from, as I said, being a
Mm.
very very sophisticated way of visualizing how to
Mm.
read and use these instruments. But if you put them together, it'll be like one solid piece.
Mm.
But they're kind of it's like a jigsaw puzzle.
Books and Us opens doors to knowledge and an understanding of the world around us. Let's discover together.
And the Samsthansa Yantra is also one of its kind instrument to measure different aspects of the sun. So, what was it specifically used for?
So the Shasthamsa was, it can be likened to a large pinhole camera. It was a chamber in which there was a tiny hole, on the south face, and there was this arc, 60-degree arc, which was made inside this dark chamber.
Mm.
So what used to happen is when the sun moves and then it comes at on the meridian, then it shines through this hole, and it's like a pinhole camera, and you get a very, very sharp image of the sun, and
Mm.
therefore you can measure different attributes of the sun. So
Mm.
these angles, the Shastamsa arc was measured, was calibrated to measure the the altitude of the sun as
Mm.
well as its declination. And you could also you could also measure its diameter. As I mentioned, it was made on the basis of the sextant, which
Mm.
was a sextant of this kind, of this scale, had been
Mm.
made earlier in
Mm.
the 14th century, if I remember correctly,
Mm.
in Central Asia. And it was made on the basis of that. It took that as its kind of inspiration. And the Delhi Shasthamsa, as I mentioned, I have not entered it because I don't think it's been entered for the last 100 years.
Mm.
But the Jaipur Jantar Mantar has its Shasthamsas working. It has two. The Delhi has only one
Mm.
Shasthamsa Yantra, which is made into one of the chambers of the Samrat Yantra. So it's kind of
Okay.
attached to the east end
Mm.
of the Samrat Yantra. The Jaipur Samrat Yantra has two Shastamsa Yantras, which are made on two chambers flanking both its sides.
Mm.
And it's very, very dramatic because it's really like a show. If you're inside the Shastamsa, you see this very tiny, very
Mm.
clear uh, sun, image of the sun moving over these scales. And as I said, these scales were marked such that you could read off the altitude, and through that you could also calculate the zenith angle, and you could read off the declination. So basically, it was meant for measuring attributes and positions of the sun. And in fact, you could also see sunspots very clearly. You can see
Okay.
sunspots very clearly as well. So it's for studying the sun, really.
It was like a giant room with this tiny hole or a
Yeah.
window through which you could see the sun shining.
Yeah. So it's like a
Yeah.
giant pinhole camera. You
Yeah.
get the image of the sun, very sharp image, very sharp image. And in fact, it's reputed to be one of the most accurate of the yantras that Jai Singh got made. But it's not there in all of his observatories. It's only there in the Samrat, attached to the Samrats of the Jaipur and the Delhi Observatory. And I think one of the reasons is that these attributes, the sun's declination, zenith angle, altitude, could also be measured through other instruments, including the Samrat, the Dakshinottara Bhitti. So, and the Shasthamsa, to be really accurate, has to be very large. So perhaps he didn't get it made elsewhere because that kind of space wasn't available. Or perhaps, he found that these attributes of the sun could also be obtained fairly accurately through other instruments that he was making in any case. Because I also find one feature of the Jantar Mantars is how efficient they are. One instrument or one yantra does more than one thing. It generally has a primary purpose, but apart from that, it can also be used for two or three other sorts of measurements. So and I think he was trying to be very efficient and optimize all this, because also, he's making such large instruments, he's spending a lot of money and effort. But nonetheless, it shows so much ingenuity that you get one building or a set of buildings to fulfill multiple functions.
And I also read that through one of these yantras, you could read the time in any other capital of the world, like London time, the Greenwich
Um,
time, and
Yes, so I'm
also
not very sure of that because that's a Mishra yantra.
uh,
And the Mishra yantra is one of the most mysterious of all the mysterious yantras of the
that's
Jantar
good.
Mantar. Because the first thing is that this is not established during Savai Jai Singh's time. It is established in Savai Madho Singh's time, who's
His son.
his son. So it's
Yeah.
about 30 years later or 3 decades later than the rest of the instruments in the Delhi Observatory. And we haven't, there are no written records available that tell us why it was established and what its functions were. Like, for instance, for the rest of the yantras, Pandit Jagannath Samrat, who was a key advisor of Savai Jai Singh, he has a couple of books called the Yantra Prakara and this Samrat Siddhant, where he describes the process of construction and the principles and the purpose of
Okay.
many of the other yantras. But we don't have that sort of information about the Mishra yantra. So a lot of it has to be surmised. Now, and the Mishra yantra is, so it's a bit like the Harappan script. It's not really, there's no unanimity about it, what its purpose is. And what you're referring to, the fact that you can actually determine the time of different places. So the front of the Mishra yantra, which is the face of the Mishra yantra that is reproduced all the time. So there are these white twin dials on both sides that we see, semicircular dials, and they're all at different angles, and it has been researched upon that one of them, it relates to Greenwich, the other relates to Zurich, one to an island in the Pacific, and another one, I think, to
Japan.
a place in Japan. Yes, that's
Yeah.
right. So now the thing is that one doesn't know if this was deliberate or why it was
Okay.
so, because there is an observatory at Zurich, there is an observatory at Greenwich, but the observatory at Zurich it post dates the instrument. So we don't quite know what its function is. And I had many conversations and discussions with the late Dr. Ratnashri from the Delhi Planetarium. She was the director of the Nehru Planetarium at Delhi, and she was one of the few, modern contemporary astronomers who did a lot of field work at the Delhi Jantar Mantar. So we actually collaborated with her and with the Nehru Planetarium on many of the outreach activities, as well as on a lot of the field research for the Delhi Jantar Mantar. So she has she had certain points of views about these instruments, but there is nobody is very clear about exactly whether this is so or not. I mean, is it just a coincidence or what? So what we actually, I think, what we realized is that the Mishra Yantra is essentially a demonstration instrument, because the other yantras, which are very large, and as we've discussed, each aspect of their form, their measurements, their size, their orientation, all of that is linked to one or two specific functions, and arising from that specific function, some supporting secondary functions. So the Mishra Yantra is much smaller than all of these other yantras, which means that the level of accuracy that you'll get with it will be less as compared to these other
Okay.
instruments. But because it's smaller, it's so much easier to access, right? For instance, I mentioned that climbing up the gnomon of the Samrat Yantra is not an easy task. Even climbing up the dials, so the sundials on the side, if you want to read off the position of the sun's shadow, you have to climb up the
Okay.
dials, and they are the steps. They're very high. There's no there's no balustrade. It keeps getting steeper as you go up, and if you're prone to dizziness or vertigo, it's not for you. So it's not easy. Whereas you also have what is called the Laghu Samrat, which is one of the instruments in the Mishra Yantra, which is very easy to use because it just goes up about maybe 7, 8, 9 feet, which is easy for anybody to access. So it's principally a demonstration instrument, and it follows the philosophy that the rest of the yantras have, which is that they're very, very efficient. So you pack in as much as you can in one building. So you have the Niyat chakras, which are oriented or aligned to different places. And you have the Laghu Samrat. You also have something called the Karka Rashi Valaya, the which is a northern face of the Mishra Yantra, which is a different instrument altogether. And on the east face of the yantra, you have a very tiny Dakshinottara Bhitti Yantra, which is again used to measure the sun's, altitude and all of that. So you have 5 instruments in one building, let's say, out of which we are not very sure exactly about at least two of the instruments. I mean, there's been surmises, but it hasn't really been kind of, I think, researched sufficiently in terms of the astronomy implications. So, but yes, there are various kinds of opinions that have been put forth, and one of them is the fact that it's aligned to these different places, and it's supposed to help you to take observations from here.
There is a lot of information which one can get from each of these yantras about the universe, the moon, the sun, and the different planets, the nakshatras, as you have mentioned in the book as well. Where was this information used, and why was it important in our Indian consciousness?
So you see, observational astronomy is central to the Indian civilization, and if right from the time of the Veds, it's been very important because the entire Vedic worldview and the rituals uh, were designed so that they had to be conducted at specific times. They had to be conducted in a specific orientation, in a specific location, And to do all of that, you needed to be able to calculate all the correct time, the correct form, the correct location, all of that. And so therefore observational astronomy was very, very important. And uh, the Jyotish is one of the
Yeah.
Vedangs. It's one of the six limbs of the six auxiliary kind of systems of knowledge to the Veds, which are essential to actually take forward whatever is there in the Veds. So so civilizationally we've had a very long, or let's say right from the beginning, astronomy has been fundamental. It's been, in fact, even later on, people like Al Baruni, they call astronomy the chief science of this region. Again, what is, you see, now we kind of have these divisions in what we understand as astronomy and what we understand as astrology, but and what we understand as mathematics and geometry and all of that. Whereas earlier on, what happened was that geometry, mathematics, algebra, all of that was essential for astronomy, both to do your predictions and calculations, as well as to be able to observe correctly. And if you look at the way in which the system of observational astronomy was carried out, again, you had to have a reference, right? Because otherwise, the sky is so big, you need some reference. So the reference that the Indian system followed was the nakshatras, and basically the stars which appear to be fixed. So they appear to be immovable, and therefore they're references. However, the stars also are actually not really fixed, and through thousands of years, they do move. So therefore, the tables that are calculated, keeping certain nakshatras or stars as a reference, have to be updated periodically. Otherwise, they'll go off. So that's at a long term kind of scenario. So therefore, you have lists of nakshatras and the positions. Periodically they're keeping on being updated. But apart from that, there are other corrections that have to be made, because we assume a lot of things. For instance, even time, right? So time today is standardized, which is it's actually, it's not as if sunset will be exactly at 6 a.m. or 6 p.m. or even divisions of a day. We do that for convenience. But otherwise, the solar time, for instance, if you measure solar time with the Samrat, it's going to be different from what is the civil time. So we have to, therefore, do a kind of a reconciliation, a correction, so to say, so that we can read civil time with the Samrat, because it reads apparent solar time, and the sun is of course not moving, but it appears to move, but it's not moving absolutely, equally in different times. The Earth itself is tilted at an axis, therefore, the Earth's angular motion varies. So the systems of time that we've standardized are for our convenience. And yes, there is a cyclical nature to the movement of the sun, apparent movement of the sun, to the movement of the moon, and all of that. But it's not as if it's absolutely uniform. So therefore, you have to recognize that, and you have to make corrections, because otherwise, your predictions, and the Indian system depends a lot on predictions, because there is something or the other in, primarily, first of all, I think in the agricultural calendar, which is related to the seasons, which requires knowledge of the seasons, and when a particular time is appropriate for a particular agricultural activity. Linked to the agricultural activity is your social and cultural calendar. And all of that has to be predicted so that people can plan their years. So today also, there are these panchangs, which are like almanacs, which have the positions listed, which have festivals listed. And these are based on predictions. Not just that, there are also predictions made about seasonal weather, possibilities or variations. And so therefore, that it's likely to, monsoon is likely to be the same thing that the meteorological department does. So all of that was actually linked to the correct measurement, and therefore the correct calculation and prediction of various celestial cyclical events, which then are the basis for your systems of living. And religion was a very important part of this entire system. As I said, it started with that in many ways. So this had a huge importance. It had a huge practical importance in the Indian subcontinent. And in fact, Jai Singh, he writes that the entire reason that I'm thinking or that I'm planning to establish an observatory is that the predicted occurrences of new moons or full moons or eclipses, they're not coming to be accurate. They're from the actual event, and therefore it's necessary to update our measurements on the basis of which we can then make such predictions. And this was the Mughal Empire also, which is the system that Jaising was a part of. Uh, for them, for the entire, for right from the emperor to, as I mentioned, the farmer on the field, to the priests, to whoever. All this was very important because this regulated what they did, how they did, when they did something. So even somebody like, I mentioned this in my book, even somebody like Aurangzeb, who otherwise was very cut and dried in many ways and didn't, he didn't hold with with a lot of stuff, including even the writing of history. But he also believed very strongly in actually planning his routine, administrative as well as political routine, according to predictions of certain events. And in fact, so much so that when he, after the war of, after the battle between Shah Jahan's sons for the Mughal throne, when Aurangzeb defeats Dara Shikoh and then he's coming to the Delhi Red Fort to be crowned, he reaches the Shalimar Bagh, which is on the outskirts of the then Shahjahanabad, now of course a part of the NCR, and the time for the crowning is there, and he can't reach the Red Fort in time, so he gets himself crowned at the Shalimar Bagh rather than
Okay.
miss that time. So what I'm trying to explain is that it
Yeah.
has a huge cultural
Yeah.
importance, and
The
it's
auspicious time, as we say
yes,
in
so
our homes.
so
Yeah.
that's one facet of it being an auspicious time, and the other facet is that it's linked to ritual practices. So,
Yeah.
for instance, Jai Singh, he daily he used to perform yagyas, and there is a certain time when you're supposed to
Okay.
ideally perform them at sunrise, at noon, and at sunset. So you must know, therefore, what time is exactly sunrise, what time is exactly sunset or noon, and also at the junction of seasons. Those are very important even today, when you have a Sankranti, or basically when the sun is transiting from one sign into another. That's also an important time of the year, and it is not just important in terms of your rituals, it's also important in terms of helping you to figure out what the coming months are likely to be in terms of the weather. And therefore, as I said, we are still primarily an agricultural country, and at that time, of course, all over the world, agricultural economy was paramount. So you need to be very efficient, and you need to know when you should prepare your land, when you should sow, all of that. And that is then linked to this entire system of being able to predict the seasons, the weathers, the positions, all of that.
Yeah, and all of them did have their own astronomical traditions and interest in this science. Recently, I had visited Humayun's tomb, and then there is an interpretation center there now.
Yes, a wonderful, it's got absolutely wonderful artifacts.
Yeah, the instruments used by Humayun and
Yes.
even the later Mughals, right? Yeah,
Yes,
small
Humayun was
instruments.
particularly interested in the science of astronomy.
So now, coming to the inevitable question, from
Yeah.
all this work, what do we know about Savai Jai Singh? I'm really interested to know his personality because he seems to be somebody who could have, been an axis of power in that time. And as you also write in your book, that the Mughals had started declining, and it was Savai Jai Singh who had become powerful, and he was such a great personality, that things were shifting towards Rajasthan at that time, and many of the Mughals, as you said in the book, are forgotten, but his name is still remembered. So, who was he actually?
So he Savai Jai Singh is part of his the traditional kind of principality is Amer, and
Hmm.
he's of course now associated with Jaipur because he established the city of Jaipur. But Jaipur
Hmm.
didn't exist before that,
Hmm.
so
Hmm.
they come from, and I'm sure you may have visited the Amer Fort, which is also a very
Yeah, yeah,
historic.
many times.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So he comes from that, from the Kachwahar Rajputs,
Hmm. Hmm.
and in fact, there is another Jai Singh who
Hmm.
is his great great
Great
grandfather.
great grandfather.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and
Hmm.
there's often confusion,
Hmm.
about both of them. So he comes from a family which had they had a long kind of lineage uh, by
Hmm.
themselves, and they're in fact they're also related to the Mughal emperors because it
Hmm.
is Raja Man Singh is also part of the same family,
Hmm.
and we know that Akbar
Hmm.
married into Raja Man Singh's family.
Hmm.
So actually, if you look at it like that, Aurangzeb and Jai Singh are related, though
Yeah,
distantly.
you're right. I read that in your book.
Yes, and
Yeah.
now, so Mirza Raja Jai Singh, who was, and Raja Man Singh were, of course, very, very important generals in the
Hmm.
Mughal armies, and
Hmm.
they were they were very highly respected. However, what happens after Raja Jai Singh is that his son Raja Ram Singh, and then subsequently his other, his descendants,
Hmm.
they, for various reasons, their importance in the Mughal imperial system decreases for a variety of reasons.
Hmm.
So when finally when Savai Jai Singh, when he comes, his actual area has dwindled a lot, and their position in the Mughal imperial hierarchy has also dwindled. So from that point to when he finally he's a very very trusted advisor, governor of the Mughal emperors.
Hmm.
That in itself is a very remarkable achievement that he manages to transform himself from what is actually dwindled into a very very small kind of principality to somebody so influential.
Hmm.
And he does that through initially primarily through his prowess in battle and his valor,
Hmm.
because he, like his forefathers, is he has to serve in the Mughal armies, and he's called to serve in the Deccan when he's pretty young,
Hmm.
just early teens, and there he's recognized for his great valor in also helping to win over a fort that the Mughals have not been able to.
Hmm.
And so from that point, he's clearly established himself as somebody who is no pushover.
Hmm.
What happens is that after Aurangzeb dies, again, despite serving in the Mughal imperial armies and acquitting himself so well,
Hmm.
because of the power alignments, the 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 son of Aurangzeb and the grandson of Aurangzeb, under whom Jai Singh has been deputed to serve,
Hmm.
and who then gets into a war of succession with Aurangzeb's eldest surviving son,
Hmm.
uh, because Jai Singh's own, his the person he's serving under loses, so he falls into disfavor with Aurangzeb's successor, Bahadur Shah I, and
Hmm.
who then takes away his kingdom and gives it to his younger brother.
Hmm.
And then then Jai Singh has to actually get back his kingdom, which he does. And not just that, he actually then establishes himself as somebody who's indispensable to the
Hmm.
Mughal dispensation.
Hmm.
So later on, he's made the governor of Malwa, he made the governor of Agra, and also he's called to Shahjahanabad when Muhammad Shah takes over as the emperor.
Hmm.
And he not only advises the emperor, he to for a lot of social kind of and administrative reforms.
Hmm.
But in all of this, he also has a very keen interest in astronomy all through. So he's supposed to have been very good at mathematics, and mathematics is something that was taught traditionally to the Kachwaha princes. And as I mentioned, mathematics and astronomy were inseparable because you demonstrated it was not just theoretical, it came into use through your studies in astronomy. So he always had this very active interest, and this then he takes forward and establishes these observatories which are unique, and even today we are studying them, we are writing about them.
Yeah.
I was in a discussion when Dr. Ratnashri was alive. She and I were part of a discussion with writers and professors and astronomers in the United States who were still looking at, who were trying to utilize the principles of his yantras and in their planetariums, in their
Oh,
ways
okay.
of understanding uh, the
Mm,
earth and the cosmos.
mm,
So that's so remarkable that so many
mm,
years
mm,
uh, before our time, he established these instruments which are still relevant,
mm,
even though we might say that the technology in them is something that's not it's not something that we use today. The other very important thing is, which I think I haven't mentioned and I must, is that the reason for making these yantras as buildings, apart from the fact that he wanted to make them more accurate and he wanted to make ensure that they didn't wear out with time, was to make them accessible to people. So he wanted to develop a scientific temper in people. He says that the telescope had come in by that time. In fact, he's supposed to have had some in his own collection, but he says that we want to make instruments that people can access, and instruments like the telescope, etc., will not, the general populace can't use them easily. So here this is open, anybody can come. And that was his objective. It was not just a lot of Western researchers have said these are like, he's a headstrong monarch, and these are like huge and extravagant monuments to his, it's like a vanity project. But it wasn't. There was a very, very strong reason behind that, which was, it was a scientific laboratory really, but it was meant to be used continuously, not just in his time but later as well. So that's another aspect to his personality, that we find that he's very foresighted. He's very concerned about not just furthering his own academic interest, but in actually allowing people to participate in this entire exercise of understanding where we are, our position vis-a-vis the cosmos and the earth, and all of that. He's also, if you look at, so that's the observatories, as I said, are a very, very important part of what he did, but they're not just what he did. As I mentioned, the establishment of Jaipur was one, a very, very important part of his activities. And he, in fact, he goes back, after 1724, 27, he actually doesn't come very much to this part of the country. He goes back to Jaipur, and then he has administrative responsibilities in Malwa, etc. And one of the reasons is that I think he figured out that there was only that much that he could probably do here, because here he was of course under the Mughal imperial system, whereas in Jaipur he had greater freedom. So
mm,
therefore in Jaipur we see that the experimentation that was initially carried out in the Delhi Jantar Mantar, some of it is, it's expanded. So, for instance, the Brihat Samrat Yantra in Jaipur is larger than the Delhi Jantar
mm.
Mantar. So that is the largest sundial in the world. This is
Okay.
the oldest and the second largest sundial. That's the largest.
Okay.
He also makes these smaller Laghu Samrat Yantras are also there. So he's essentially experimenting, and
Mm,
that's also, that's the principle of science, isn't it? That you're
mm,
constantly trying to experiment and correlate what you're getting with your observations through other kind of experiments, and see therefore what is the best way. So he does that. And at the same time, if you look at Jaipur, he transforms it into a center of learning. So Jaipur became a place where a lot of very, very learned people came. Not just that, he also transforms into a center of business.
mm,
So, it became a very, very prosperous place during his time. he also does a lot of social work. So he works towards kind of removing divisions in society, whether it's, within, let's say, a caste or intercaste, whatever it is, or within religions. So I think that is so remarkable, especially when we see the way politics is worked out, in our days, and we are supposed to presumably have progressed. But if you look at the kind of concerns that he had and how he implemented those concerns with a great deal of forethought, with a great deal of empathy, with a great deal of acumen. So he's got administrative acumen. He's got great deal of political, let's say, foresight. He's got as a person. He's somebody who's got the he's got the benefit of people at large in his mind. And he's also a very he's also a very forceful personality. We might sort of these days conflate forcefulness with
With aggressiveness.
yes, absolutely. That's the word. But it's not that. You can be forceful, you can be influential, and you can be very empathetic. You can be very kind. Within, of course. I mean, these are these are things that we are kind of reading from what he does, and obviously people are complex, and we can't say everything about. We can't say with certainty everything about him, but this is what we read from what read in the sense this is what we interpret from all the works he has left behind, an important part of which is of course this legacy of the Jantar Mantars. And when Dr. Ratnashri was very active, there's to be a lot of these outreach programs, that were done with school students, with amateur astronomers, with citizens. And it's actually, it is so revealing that when you are there, you understand, concepts of geography, which were just, we read about and didn't make any sense to us. When you go there, it's suddenly like, oh, this is what it means. Things like spherical trigonometry, which again is so difficult to visualize in 2 dimension. So I believe these observatories, apart from their value for their purpose of astronomy, they can be used to explain so many things: physics, geography, mathematics, trigonometry, or just a way of looking at the world. Because to use these instruments, you have to scan the entire skies. You have to constantly, kind of relate where you are with what you're seeing. You can't lose sight of that. So I think that's very, very important to not lose sight of, our place in the world, and understand that we are just a small part, but we are still an integral part of the world. And I think, so philosophically also it has this kind of layer to it, which even if you don't know all this about the yantras, I think most people who go there, they come away, they're moved by them in some way, which perhaps they can't describe. And I think it's this kind of this relationship that the yantras establish between us and the larger world, which we respond to even if we have no academic theoretical knowledge about or historical knowledge about what they're about. And of course, if we have that knowledge, then our understanding is that much richer, and we come away that much wiser or better equipped to understand things. Which is why what I've tried to do in the book, try to do it as simply as possible, because they're very complex. And also you have to understand that I'm an architect first, and my interest and my other training is in conservation, but I'm not trained in astronomy. So again, an astronomer would look at it, would uncover another layer, which is what happened with the interaction between us and Dr. Ratnashri, or Dr. V.N. Sharma, who's an astrophysicist, who's again done a lot of work on the Jantar Mantar, and he's written a book on it. But I think it also fosters that kind of dialogue, between people and between us and, let's say, the world, symbolically.
Yeah, and architecture is the first thing which you see over here, and then you learn the utility, and
Yes,
then from there you see the social and political and
yes,
economic
yes, absolutely.
implications. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yes. So the architecture is fundamental to the function.
Mm. So before we, so I just have two more questions. I know it's a long time. So would you like to take a break and come back, or is it fine?
Um, how long do you think we'll talk for? I mean, I know the thing is there's so much, though it's a small,
Yeah,
physically a small site, there's so much that's
yeah.
packed into it. But what would you
So,
like to do?
so would you like to keep it for another day in another episode, or?
Perhaps yes,
Yeah,
perhaps
that would be
yes.
good. Yeah, because I want to talk about first of all Pandit Jagannath Samrat, because I think it's very important to mention him and
Yes,
the person behind building these observatory on behalf of Sawai Jai Singh,
yes,
and also about looking ahead. How do you see the conservation process? Because I know that from the book that you have been part of that project, but that had a limited time, I think, and then after that it's been, I think, almost 15-20 years.
yes. I mean, though they've been off and on, they've been kind of thing, but yes,
Yeah,
at
because you have
least,
made some
uh,
very good
yes,
suggestions about how you can open it up to schools, and what all we can do with
yes.
conservation and preserve the buildings.
What I find very important, I think, to do is that appreciation of the Jantar Mantars
Mm,
must be for what they are and what they were,
mm,
not from what we've been kind of, what we still look at them from a very colonial point of view, which
mm,
was a deliberate ploy
mm,
to reduce the value of
mm,
anything that was non-European, because at that time, that was the way they were thinking. I mean, that was
mm,
what they were kind of indoctrinated into, that anything that is from the non-European world cannot be a pioneering system of knowledge. And
mm.
but we must recognize that these were pioneering systems of knowledge, also that they were continuation of existing systems of knowledge.
Yeah, that's
And
what I wanted. I was trying to come to that in between, but then we just went somewhere else because that's so important, and that's also important part of your book.
yes, they were
Yeah.
and this existing systems of knowledge
Mm,
is not just the tradition that Savai Jai Singh comes from, but it's
mm,
also the other systems of knowledge that
mm.
he has access to, or that he made efforts to access.
Yeah.
So systems of astronomy and science in India at that time, as well as outside India at that time. So
Mm,
he
mm,
didn't make any distinction between, this is my knowledge, this is my tradition, this
yeah.
is your tradition. He was interested in fulfilling his objective to the best way possible, which is to take measurements as accurately as possible. And
Mm,
for that, you know, get as much information, analyze as much information, and apply as much information as you can.
mm,
So, and I think that's very, very important today, because we tend
mm,
to kind of closet and classify,
mm,
um, information based on its provenance and where it's come from. And knowledge is
mm,
knowledge. So I think that's very, very important. That's an important lesson to take away
mm,
from Savai Jaising's own trajectory personally, as well
mm.
as from the Jantar Mantars. They
Yeah.
don't just represent
Mm,
one system. They
yeah,
might be a continuation, or they might represent maybe the philosophy of one system. And
mm,
I'll briefly explain why I say that. And this is
mm,
something that I write about and I also
mm,
include in my lectures,
mm,
which is that, and I think it's very important to recognize it, so that we can all benefit from it. Which is that,
mm.
you see, the Indian tradition is an encyclopedic tradition.
Yeah.
The very form of research in the Indian tradition is to first survey what exists. It's a Purva Paksh approach.
Mm,
So before you formulate your opinion, you see what is already existing, and maybe you don't need to advance,
mm,
another opinion. Maybe your
mm.
opinion is already, it's been
It's already
enunciated
there.
and
Yeah.
articulated. Yes, you just need to be aware of it. So
Mm,
you don't have to necessarily be new, or novel or different. And that's what the Indian system was about, which is why traditionally, if you look at any one system, you also get information about other systems, right?
mm,
Because that's the way it proceeds, and that makes so much sense, that
mm,
you draw on the bank of knowledge that exists. You don't distinguish between different faiths, philosophies,
mm,
geographical regions, or whatever. Knowledge is knowledge. And then, of course, how you use it and what application it has will obviously be individual to the purpose that you are envisaging for
mm,
it. So this is
mm,
something that I really wanted to say, that the Jantar Mantras are an outcome of such a methodology of gaining knowledge.
mm.
which is why Sabai Jaisingh accessed every possible thing that he could, and he called the French Jesuits and the Portuguese and the
You've written Portuguese, the Bavarians.
yes,
They all
whoever. I mean,
came as
he got
experts.
translations done.
Yeah.
He
And
so he did not make any distinction, and I think that
mm,
is the way to
mm,
to really learn anything, and that's the way to really
mm,
progress. And
mm,
so, in that sense, I think the Jantar Mantras have this huge lesson that we can all take away from, because they
mm.
kind of embody that kind of uh, system, that kind of worldview, which we all need to be aware of. We need to appreciate it, and we need to incorporate it, I think, in the way we work, in the way we live, in the way we access knowledge.
Yeah, and that actually it's a monument of synthesis.
And what is also very interesting, I'm sorry, we're talking longer than I expected, but what is also very interesting is that if you look at it outwardly, it
Mm.
doesn't carry any of the trappings of any other kind of building before it, right? So
Yeah.
when you look at it, it looks completely, it looks completely unlike anything that's been there
Mm.
before. But it's
Or
not.
identified with any particular faith or religion or
Yes, yes.
yeah.
So that's again something to
Mm,
to appreciate, that
mm,
it is not trying to be different.
mm,
It is not trying to be, as I said, something that's so arresting, but it's
mm,
just trying to do its function very well,
mm,
and therefore the forms are a result of that. And again, we'll perhaps discuss it in the next
mm,
episode. But
mm,
the fact that you have, apart from the architecture being a reflection of the geometry of the earth, being a reflection of the function, it's also a reflection of stable principles of building.
mm,
So you are trying to lessen out the weight of the masonry. You need a huge amount of
mm,
building material because they're large instruments. They need to be stable, but you're also trying to lessen their self weight. And so
mm.
you have a system of arches, you
Windows
have a
and
system of
arches. Yeah.
openings, and
Yeah.
and they again do multiple things. They lessen the weight, they allow air movement, they allow visual access. So but all of it is related to a very, very clear and practical function. It is
Mm.
not making a statement for the sake of making a statement,
Yeah.
but it's making inadvertently, or
Mm,
just by dint of doing its function so well,
mm,
it arrests our attention even today.
mm. So great. We have lots to talk about for the next episode as well.
Yes, I had thought I'd be very brief, and I'm sorry, but I
No, no,
think I
not
have.
at all. I'm glad that we are discussing this in detail because such knowledge is there in books. Sometimes the books are only in some dusty libraries and nobody can get to them.
Yes, yes.
And and like for example, I don't think your book it had a limited purpose. Did it get distributed widely or
Well, you see, at the time that it came out, it did.
yeah?
But
So
thank you
that's
so
what.
much for
Uh,
getting this discussion going, because
uh,
as you said, uh, it might have a lot of information in it, might
mm.
have a lot of insights in it, but finally it has to get across to people. And
Absolutely. That's what I want to do.
yeah, so thank you for
Yeah.
initiating this
Yeah.
and being one of the ways to get this information across, because my purpose in writing the book and was to ensure that the Jantar Mantras are appreciated for what they are, not
Mm,
for a reduced and also a warped kind of knowledge about them. Because one of the things that we'll talk about in the next episode, which I think we were successful in doing, is
mm,
to at least shift the understanding in
mm,
some people, including the official custodians, that these are not just archaeological monuments, these are
mm,
scientific instruments,
mm,
which still have value today. They may not have value in terms of current, research on astronomy, but they have value in terms of educational
mm,
dissemination, as I mentioned, about understanding spherical trigonometry, physics, geography, as well as basic principles of astronomy. And in fact, Dr. Ratnashri used to say that they're the simplest and the easiest method to do coordinate,
mm,
celestial measurements today, and spherical coordinate measurements. And she did that with school children, with other people.
mm,
So it would be wonderful if people could do that, because then that's the reason they were constructed. They were established by
Yeah.
Savai Jai
It's
Singh.
just waiting for students and people to bring other people on a walk and explain to them and
Yes, and if
learn.
you spend, if you, as I said, if you just spend half a day there, you see the sun shadow moving. That in itself is such
Mm,
a revelation. It's
yeah.
it kind of shifts one's understanding of
Mm.
time, and
Yeah,
all of
absolutely.
that completely. And also the entire notion of, we've learned about shadows in physics. There are also ways in which you can take very accurate measurements. You can sort of overcome the limitations of size. And again, perhaps we'll talk about that, how the size of the yantras is both a strength as well as a challenge, both in
Mm.
terms of its conservation as well as in terms of using them as instruments of astronomy.
So, okay, then, so we'll say goodbye for now and we'll come back later, probably, next year,
Yes,
say in
and I hope you
February,
have
March.
enough to make this into a composite kind of a, a, a podcast.
Okay. Yeah, yeah, definitely. We'll discuss the questions and everything
Right.
beforehand.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Ranjit. I really appreciate
Mm,
all the efforts you've taken to read the book, to ask your
mm,
questions, and
mm,
to get this conversation on air.
mm. Okay, you're most welcome, and thank you to you as well for joining.
Thank you.
Okay, bye bye.
Bye.
So that was Anisha Shekhar Mukherji talking about her book, Jantar Mantar, Maharaja Sawai Jai Singh's Observatory in Delhi. And with that, we come to the close of season 2 of Books and Us. We have much to thank Anisha for. In many ways, this season belonged to her. She was with us across 3 episodes, two on the Red Fort of Shahjahanabad and one on Jantar Mantar. She has helped us to see these monuments not just as structures of stone, but as living repositories of art, science, culture, and memory. And this journey isn't over yet. We'll be bringing one more episode with Anisha on this very same theme in our next season. Season 3 launches in February 2026 with a lineup of fascinating books and conversations already waiting to unfold. We also invite you to share your favorite episode of the season. And please tell us what topic or book you would like us to cover in season 3. To our listeners, especially those who have walked with us regularly, thank you. Your feedback and encouragement have kept us inspired throughout this season. So until we meet again, this is Ranjit signing off from season 2 of Books and Us. Goodbye and take care.